So the first pillar is going to be introduced by Anna, and that first pillar is product. We have a question and answer thereon, and then the next pillar is going to be introduced by Lydia, and then the final one today is by Maija. We have a second webinar on Wednesday, which we will deal with social value and ethics. Vikki's going to introduce that. Corporate environmental impact by Maija on Wednesday. So if I can hand over to Anna, that'll be super. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Lorcan. Okay, bear with me for a moment whilst try and share my screen.
Should be host.
And then take a left. Yeah, this
Everybody,
is the.
make sure they're on mute, please. Thank you.
Fantastic. Hopefully everyone can see that correctly. Great, thank you. Okay, so as Lorcan has said, my name's Anna. I'm the Director of Sustainability for Bunzl Cleaning and Hygiene Supplies. I've been with the business for 4 years now, and I've been supporting the CHSA's Sustainability Committee for the last 2, I'd say 2 and a bit, probably. I don't know where the last few years have gone. In that time, we've been putting together this roadmap for sustainability to support everyone on heading in the right direction. And so I thought I'd give you a bit of an introduction to the product pillar. I hope that there's no surprises in this today. If anything, it's just food for thought, and hopefully a nice setup for answering some of your questions as well. So as Lorcan's introduced, the product pillar is all about the product itself. So this is how the end user is receiving it, and then what the end user does with that product when they've finished using it as well. So focusing on how we can help end users to get more from less. This has benefits for the whole supply chain, but also making sure that product is designed with the end of life, with its whole life cycle in mind as well. So just some ideas on what more from less means in some of our various categories. With chemicals, this is all about getting more in-use product to those end users in one go. So things like concentrated, super concentrated or sachet products all help with this. They also they save customer storage space, they save in transport emissions. There are lots of other benefits additional to having concentrated products as well. And of course, with sachets or controlled dosing, you're helping that end user get the most out of that product, ensuring they're not overdosing on certain chemicals, and making sure we're getting all of those advertised doses out of that one bottle as well. And of course, wherever possible, we're entering into more circular economy ideas now. So having refillable chemicals, so refillable bottles, is another way of keeping materials in use for longer as well. With things like paper, we're seeing, again, for a long time now, we've seen things like Talks Smart One being with the single sheet dispensing. I know there's lots of other single sheet dispensing available now as well. And all of this, again, helps to control that usage, make sure people aren't taking reels and reels of paper for whatever they need. But we also need to look at the rest of the life cycle as well. So how can we make sure that the stub roll waste is minimised? So I know that there's some great work going on from Kimberly-Clark with a stub roll transfer mechanism. This dispenses single sheet, but it also means that you can reduce waste by up to 14% by dispensing right to the core before transferring to the new roll. So again, another way to reduce that waste in use. And then we also need to think about end users' behaviours as well. So things like hand towels. So the less absorbent they are, the more frustrating they are to use, but also the more that end user needs. Some of these things do come with additional cost, and we have to accept that, and it'd be up to end users ultimately to decide what they want to pay for. But I think we need to make sure that the options are there, so that we're encouraging this move to more from less thinking. And then lastly, on these examples, we have equipment as well. So the focus here is really about durability. And making sure that that equipment can last for as long as possible, but it also, during its lifetime, that it can be repaired and looked after. And that shouldn't just be down to the end user. It's up to us in the supply chain to make sure that we're supporting our end users in how they look after those products, accessing support, accessing repair kits and advice, so that we are giving our end users lifetime product care as well. Another element to think about here is recycled content and the recyclability of the products. These are two very different things, very easy to get those words mixed around. And so we need to think about the materials that are in use when we're manufacturing the products, so that, you know, the more that we can increase consumption of recycled materials, the more demand there is for it, and the more infrastructure will follow to support accessing those materials as well. But we also need to make sure that the products that we're putting into the market are recyclable or reusable at the end of their life, again, to reduce waste, but to also encourage feeding back into the top of that supply chain, so those materials are there as well. So just some questions to ask yourself when you're thinking about product design is, what happens to that product at the end of its life? How would it typically be disposed of? If it's made of more than one type of material, can those materials be easily separated to be put into the right waste streams and to be more readily recovered? What is the current waste infrastructure? We're seeing more products come through now that are biodegradable, for example, or compostable, but we also know that the waste infrastructure for those kind of products is still in its infancy. So we need to think about what we're putting into supply chain and how we support our end users in accessing the waste route that it's intended for as well. And then lastly on this, how can we reduce the associated waste altogether? What can we do to make sure that that end user has got less to deal with when they finish using that product than they might have originally as well? So it's food for thought on that. And ultimately, we need to reduce waste. So this is about rethinking what we've normally done and we've done for many, many years. The more that we control dispensing and dosing for site users and cleaning operatives, the more we're going to be able to prevent waste, able to make sure that they are getting maximum use out of that product as well. And we have to think about using the whole product. So there are lots of examples, particularly of chemicals and with some paper as well, where we know there'll always be some waste because of the typical way that it's used or replenished. So, for example, we know with typical use with hand cleansers that we all see it if you go to a public bathroom. People will take more than one pump of hand soap when they're going to wash their hands. So design a product that dispenses half a dose of soap, because if we know that people typically take 2 doses or 3 of soap, then they're still only using as much as they always should have. Just by monitoring that behaviour and thinking about how people typically use the product rather than the way that it's perhaps intended to be used or engaged with as well. And so we also need to think about how we bring things back around the supply chain. So it's not just about how it's used, but it's about how can we encourage thinking circular? What can we do with closed loop solutions? Is there support, and are there ways for us to get back those products at the end of their lives to be refilled, replenished? What kind of things can we put in place to ultimately reduce waste in our supply chains and for our end users? So that's our product pillar. Thank you very much. I'll hand back to Lorcan and Kathy for Q&A.
Thanks, Anna. I guess the one of the most significant questions, or one of the most common questions that we've had for the panel to think about in response to the product is how do buyers actually distinguish between the certifiable and the proven claims, and the between certifiable/provable claims that suppliers are making versus ones that have little or no substance or meaning. I don't know who wants to take that one first. Anyone?
Well, I can start and then the others can build on. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Maija and I come from Metsa Group. I would say that if you think of like green claims and what you can trust and what you cannot trust, I think one of the key pillars is that the claims are data driven. And of course, it's good if you have a third-party certification, but always when you see a green claim, I think the first thing is to look up for the background data, what it refers to. So that's what I would consider the most important aspect.
Thank you.
I would support that. Look for the data behind it, but I would also say find context for that data. Ask what part of the product life cycle it's relevant to, and try and find other examples from other sources so that you can either hopefully find the same thing more than once, or at least get a better picture of what perhaps wasn't included in that data as well.
Yeah, and if I still can build on, I agree with Anna, because if, for example, we think of circular economy, I think we should kind of optimize our resource use on a system level. So optimize parallelly the streams of energy, material, value, even data. So kind of I really agree with Anna that you need to have a system level approach.
Okay, thank you. And the next two questions are kind of combined. How do I establish the environmental impact of my product portfolio? And how do I use that information to work out what I should do next? Who wants to leap in with that one?
I suppose I'll lead in that. To looking at your product portfolio, you're looking at doing a life cycle assessment and trying to trace back as far as you can, as far as possible, where your raw materials are coming from, where the chemical is coming from a manufacturing point of view, and looking both up and downstream. So what's going into products, and then how is it disposed of? How is it recyclable? Like Anna said in her presentation, are there separate components? Can these easily be separated? And what are the recycling streams for your products that you are producing?
Anyone want to add to that?
Yeah, I agree as well. And it's really critical to have a value chain approach. For example, we at Metsa Group, because we kind of cover a large part of the wood value chain under the same umbrella. So we even kind of have also the forest owners in our value chains directly. So we have been a lot of collaboration and focused on that, on the value chains, and even some LCAs, for example, in a collaboration with Metsa Tissue and then Metsa Fiber. Metsa Fiber is a pulp producer. So I think that has been really useful. And the collaboration also. It's not only about the metrics. I think it's also a lot about the collaboration to optimize the value chain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the best way to understand the environmental impact of your product really is to do a life cycle assessment. There are lots of consultancies out there now that will support with doing that sort of thing. And I think that really is the only way for us to fully understand the impact of products. We can, but if that's, I know that's a big investment for anyone. And I think just taking on board some of the things that Vikki suggested there as well, just breaking it down, understanding the different ways that your product might interact with environmental impacts, what those might be, and thinking about what is best out of this scenario, what is best that we could be doing, and deciding how far you can go towards doing that as well.
Okay. Thank you. We've got, I don't know, on the CHSA website, there's a fact sheet about conducting a life cycle assessment, which has quite a lot of useful questions that you can ask yourselves. So that might be something, if anyone's interested in exploring that further, to look into. And now over to Lydia, who is going to be taking us through the packaging pillar, or introducing us to it.
I am on mute. Hello, sorry. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Lydia Brant, and I work for Essity. I have been with Essity for over 5 years, but have recently taken up a new role, an exciting new role as a sustainability specialist. So I'm relatively new in post, but I've on a voyage of discovery and learning, which is really super exciting. I'm just checking is my screen sharing, because it was sharing and now it's not. It is brilliant. Thank you. Sorry, I'm so used to Teams and not working on Zoom. I'm now. I've got a blank screen now.
It is sharing beautifully as far as we're concerned.
I can't unfortunately see my presentation. But if you can see it, I have my notes. So
you're on the introduction slide at the moment. So if you want to click onto the next slide.
Yeah, I've got. So sorry, I can't.
Technology is frustrating.
Oh no, it's that's not it either.
So our tea time is
618.
On mute, please. Imran.
Sorry, 1 second. I don't know why that happened.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm having real trouble viewing I can only see myself.
Talk us through your notes, Lydia. That'll be fine.
Yeah, apologies. You won't be able to see me moving it along. So obviously when we look at packaging, sorry if I'm looking down as well, not at you guys.
No worries.
It's really important that we look at the whole picture. You know, obviously we're looking at our products and the items that we use to package our products, but then obviously those products go on a journey, and it's really important that we also then look at the packaging that we are using to rebox that. And I think that potentially sometimes can get overlooked, or perhaps we over repackage them. So I think that that's really important, you know, all that reboxing that takes place, we have to consider that when looking at packaging. Obviously packaging has a massive sustainability impact. There's over 400 million tons of plastic waste generated annually, and 36% of that is from packaging alone. So that is a huge burden, you know, and rethinking how we package products can have a positive impact on sustainability and circularity. So packaging materials and the waste created from them. So really it's, you know, how packaging is fundamental to the branding. And it's the first thing that consumers see, you know, and obviously any sort of changes we don't want to take away from that, but it's a real, you know, we have to make a real consideration that we can't underestimate the impact that it has. And looking forwards, how we can make positive changes. So really, I think, and this isn't rocket science, it's reducing consumption. So reducing the amount of packaging the product needs, and that consumption of materials that we're using. I mean, it sounds obvious, but the first step to me on any sustainability journey is looking at overconsumption, and having anything there that is unnecessary. And it's also thinking any reduction in packaging also has more benefits. So obviously, yes, there are sustainability benefits, but you will look at, you won't have as much storage space when you're, you know, when you're having these items sitting in warehouses. If we can reduce packaging, you know, things like freight and everything, it has a knock-on effect throughout the cycle. It's also looking at reducing plastic. There's still an awful lot of plastic in packaging. So again, if you have to use plastic, making sure that it's easily recyclable. You know, some products, you know, lend themselves to needing to be, you know, packaged in plastic. But yes, making sure that that is recyclable is super important. And then there's that option of looking at mono material packaging. So the more components there are to anything, you know, packaging is one thing, but anything really, the more difficult it is to recycle, or, you know, sometimes actually it's not possible to recycle it. You know, you've got to think, if I've got an item and there's multiple things, they've got to be separated and segregated. Sometimes they've got to be tested. What are they before we can even think about recycling? So if we, you know, look at a single approach, it's going to be much easier at the other end to recycle them. And then looking at materials as well, there's so much opportunity out there for different types of material. One that I've come across recently is styrofoam made from mushrooms. So you know, the possibilities are endless with the actual types of things we're looking at. And I think, you know, we can get sort of stuck in, or, you know, this is a certain thing has to be, you know, we've always packaged it in plastic, or we've always used it this way. It's really just breaking it apart and looking at it from a, you know, how can we reduce it? How can we, you know, and I think another thing is looking around at your competitors and other people in your industry. You know, what are they doing that's different? You know, I think a collaborative approach is really important.
Thank you.
Thank you, and sorry about my technical difficulties.
Thank you, Lydia. Are you able to unshare the
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, and return the host as well. A couple of questions in follow-up to that then. one is, and you talked about switching away from, or you actually talked about getting the balance right between plastic packaging and other sorts of packaging. How do companies, what's a way to do that? So what's the way to manage how do you strike the balance between actually plastic packaging maybe what's required in order to make sure the product reaches the end user in the state that it needs to be, versus needing to, how do you strike that balance?
Yeah, so I think you've got to look at it, it's obviously got to be optimized for both sustainability and for the product protection. You know, really look at exploring recycled or sustainable materials. You know, they've got to obviously maintain the product quality but minimizing the environmental impact, and that comes with obviously research, really doing your homework on looking at what other people are doing as well. You know, I think there's so many brilliant ideas out there. You know, approaching different, you know, manufacturers of packaging products and seeing what's going on. But I think, you know, that you've got to really understand. I think sometimes things might seem sustainable, but it's making sure. I had a conversation just last week where somebody was looking at a particular avenue, and on the face of it, it seemed brilliant, but actually it really, when you went through the chain of actually how it was produced, it wasn't. So it's really having those conversations with manufacturers and understanding them. And I think, you know, you need to test it. I mean, you try different ideas. You know, if something doesn't work the first time, don't be discouraged, and, you know, really try different options and yeah, seeing what's out there.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I can build on, I have my background in research. And I've also been working at VTT in Technical Research Center of Finland. And we actually had a project in which we kind of calculated the life cycle analysis of the product and packaging together. And I think that's a really good kind of approach, because anyway, the packaging is to protect the product. And if you get a lot of product losses due to poor packaging, then actually the environmental impact is much bigger, the negative environmental impact. So again, I call for a holistic approach, and I'm really looking forward that probably in the future we could do more kind of a life cycle analysis, not just for the product itself and the packaging itself, but like together. I think that also goes for the plastic. So sometimes you need to have a certain amount of plastics to have a good protection and to kind of safeguard the hygiene aspects of the product.
And on that note, I wouldn't say that, you know, we don't demonize plastics. Plastics definitely do have when you look at the life cycle assessment of some other materials, that it may be possible to transport chemicals in, for example. Plastic does still come out with the lowest life cycle assessment when we have looked into some of this. It's lightweight, reusable, and in the majority of cases recyclable at the end. So this isn't a demonizing plastic talk, but yeah, it does.
It's about what's appropriate for the task required, isn't it? If you need to carry liquids, we know plastic's really good for carrying liquids. It's about making sure it's a type of plastic, as you've said, that can be recycled or refilled, or it's putting those mechanisms in place that make sure that we're making the best use of those materials and we're being responsible in how we apply them.
Definitely. Just an example of that. I was at a meeting a few weeks ago and discussing this with somebody else, and a really good example of that is egg boxes. Egg boxes are generally made out of like cardboard, and they're not ideal if eggs get broken or people use them and they tip the egg back in. They can't be recycled. Whereas actually plastic, you know, you can clean it. It's, like you say, it's lightweight, it can be recycled. But because perception is that it's terrible, no supermarkets want to box the eggs in plastic anymore. So it really illustrates that point nicely, I think.
Can I one more quick question on this that we've had is, how do we tackle customers' resistance to increase costs in relation to sustainable solutions, sustainable packaging solutions? Does anyone have any views about how to navigate the situation with customers who might be resistant?
I think I was just going to say, I think one of the most important things is education. I think there's going to be opinions and increased resistance, but I think it's about education and communicating with customers perhaps the long-term benefits of changes. That actually, from making switches, there's a long-term view that actually you could end up saving money, the longer it goes on, but also that maybe there might be an increase in cost in the packaging, but there are savings to be made in other places, such as, reduction in storage and things like that. So I think it's all about having clear communication and explaining why changes are being made.
Yeah, and I think one thing you can also do is to kind of put it in figures. For example, show the customers the avoided emissions, because then it's really concrete if you can do something in a more sustainable way and kind of show the handprint, so the positive impact of the change in numbers, for example, avoided greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, I think demonstrating those other benefits really helps to balance out the increased cost. Where you can show that the product's going to last longer or go further as well because it's in this different packaging. There's always a reason driving that new packaging adoption, and I think more often than not there are probably more benefits to outweigh the costs related to packaging changes.
Thank you. That's probably all we've got time for on packaging then, so it's over to Maija with transportation, if that's okay.
Okay, so I start sharing my screen.
There we go. There we are.
Good. I suppose you can see the slide now.
Yes.
Yes, great. Okay, so great. So it's a real pleasure to present this pillar 3, which the topic of which is distribution and transportation. And as said, my name is Maija Pohjakallio and I work as Vice President of Climate and Circular Economy at Metsa Group. I've been with Metsa for about 2 years, but for about the last 10 or more years, I've been working with sustainability, bioeconomy and circular economy. My background though is in research. So in the very beginning of my career, I did research and teaching. So the pillar 3 actually it integrates or includes very many aspects, as it includes also the movement of the raw materials as well as the distribution of the finished products, so the end products to customers. But the key elements are design, so product and packaging design, because I think many of the environmental impacts actually of the products and the distribution are already dictated in the design phase. Then obviously optimization of delivery routes is important, as well as using as low carbon transport means as possible. But what I would also like to highlight, and I really like in the roadmap approach, is that whatever pillar, whatever aspect you are dealing with, strategic and systematic approach is key. So you can start with small steps, but if you do it in a systematic way and kind of start measuring, start monitoring, start setting targets and really monitoring the proceedings, I think everybody can get far in with that approach. So really this strategic and systematic approach is key. And then I'll give some food of thought with some case examples from Metsa Tissue. So regarding the optimizing of the packaging design, so our packaging team has really been kind of in detail optimizing even the placement patterns in the transport pallets and kind of optimizing so that you could move the items to the customers as efficiently as possible. Then a very important rule at Metsa Tissue is that this distance strategic rule of 500 kilometers, and it means that we aim that we would have as local production as possible so that the transportation distance wouldn't exceed 500 kilometers of the finished product. And at the moment, over 90% of Metsa Tissue's deliveries of the final products are made within a distance of 500 kilometers. And actually, if you think of tissue products, they contain quite a lot of air. So if you have to transport the finished end products long distances, it actually means transportation of air. And currently in UK, around 40% of all tissue papers are imported from outside of UK. And actually this year, Metsa Tissue made an investment decision, which was very much sustainability driven. So this year we have made the decision to invest in a new tissue paper mill, in a quite large one. The production capacity will be around 240,000 tons of tissue papers. And it will be situated in eastern riding of Yorkshire. So kind of we want to somehow follow the principle that grown in Nordics means that the trees and the pulp comes from the Nordic countries, mainly from Finland, and then the tissue paper is made locally in the UK. And this will actually increase the self-sufficiency of UK in tissue papers by 30%. And then obviously the last bullet point also, I think it applies to all of these pillars, so committed to continuous improvement. We at Metsa Group and Metsa Tissue, we have several sustainability targets, and one of Metsa Tissue's target is to reduce the carbon emissions per product ton from transports by 22% from 2019 level. So I think really this setting targets and then measuring the proceedings is a good way to move around. And then I think also goes with all the pillars. Collaboration is also key. So collaboration along the value chain. Thank you so much. And now we can start the discussion.
Thank you. One of the questions we've had is about customers and order quantities and things. You talk about optimizing transportation and optimizing what you can get on each transportation and things. But we've got one here that says customers resist minimum order quantities and still want same-day deliveries. How do we balance that, the demand of the customers, with the need to optimize transport usage and optimize capacity on journeys outbound and inbound?
That's a great question. I can speak from experience on this one. So it's always a difficult subject to talk to customers about minimum order value, but I think in a very similar way to how we discussed packaging, being about talking about the additional benefits, what we found is that the best way that we can engage customers with more efficient ordering is to show them the additional benefits to changing how they order. And that's not just carbon footprint reduction, which is a key message that we talk to our customers about. It's also the soft cost savings for them as well. There are SIPS figures that you can look up that show that on average it costs about £50 in operating costs to place an order. So for your customers to be combining orders that they're placing actually should be saving them money over time as well, in theory, because their employees can spend their time doing other things. So ultimately, we found the best way to engage customers in increasing minimum order values is not to talk about minimum order values at all, but to talk about how we want to be more efficient. We want to work together to make sure that we are collaborating in the most efficient way possible.
Thank you. Anyone want to add to that?
One concrete example is that, for example, we at Metsa Group, we have made some common sustainability commitments within the value chain, so with our suppliers, etc. So that when you have a common commitment and a common target, it's actually a very nice way of collaboration. And yeah, so that's one kind of a concrete way. But I totally agree, Anna, what you said.
Okay. Thank you. You also talked about low carbon transport means, and we've got a question saying electric vehicles grab the attention as the big change that we all need to make, but they cost a lot. Are there any incentives or are there any alternatives?
Well, I think optimizing the routes is kind of the delivery routes is very important. So the whole logistics is really a system, and I think almost everybody can find spots for optimization. And then also thinking of this, how long distances you really want to transport the finished, so the end products which contain a lot of air as well. Yeah. So those are things as well. And then again, the same aspect than within the previous pillar. I think then if you are able to calculate the avoided emissions, that's a good motivation also to move into low carbon transportation, even though it would be a bit more costly.
I think electric vehicles are an investment. There's no way around it. And I think that what we're seeing as a distributor is that they're great for local urban routes, but for our customers that are maybe a bit further out, and for those routes that need to make more drops or carry a larger load, we still need larger vehicles where electric vehicle technology hasn't caught up. For us, we're now looking at HVO fuel, which we'll start investing in next year to help reduce the emissions that we're creating while still using vehicles that rely on that sort of fuel. This will have an immediate benefit because we can reduce emissions by up to 98% using HVO fuel. But we know that it's not the final solution. There needs to be something that follows. If you plan your way into HVO fuel, you need to start planning your way out of it as well. Because much like any other natural resource, demand will grow, and obviously supply will need to catch up. And there's only so much agricultural land and space that we can allow for HVO production, especially if the aviation industry catches on to it, which I'm sure it will. So it is a real challenge that we're all facing. I don't think we have all the answers yet, if I'm honest. I think we're all just trying to make the best of what's available to us at the moment. Things like route optimization, as Maija said, is probably your strongest place to start. Make sure you're making the best use of the vehicles you have. But looking at ways you can reduce emissions now does have a knock-on benefit, because carbon has a lag effect in the atmosphere. So everything that we're producing now will still impact climate change 10, 20 years into the future, if not longer. So we need to be making immediate reductions and finding permanent ways to prevent that from happening.
And actually, one very interesting topic is that also your driving habits actually affect the fuel consumption. I just heard actually a radio program in which a transportation company had made kind of a game for their people. So with the help of which they tried to kind of educate them with respect to driving habits. So it really, it has actually surprisingly high impact, the driving habits on the fuel consumption.
Yeah, making sure your vehicles are, well maintained and things. You've got, the proper PSI of air in your tires and things. It all adds up and all has an effect on your emissions when you're driving. I think there are still some grants available for looking at switching to electric vehicles if that is the way you are wanting to go. But it's not something I've investigated fully.
Yeah. And I think the message that Anna, you gave, that you have to proceed step by step, but if you set a target, you somehow automatically start kind of minimizing and start optimizing, because when you have a target, you are following kind of the numbers, and that's kind of a driver for you, but still it happens step by step. And all these, I think, Scope 3 emissions, it's really kind of something we all have to work on quite heavily.
Thank you. More about Scope 3 emissions on our next webinar on Wednesday. In the meantime, we're just about done. Is there a kind of a parting comment any members of the panel would like to just a parting thought to leave for the people who've attended today? A quick key win, for example, or if you're only going to do one thing or only think one thing, what would be the most useful thing to think first?
Just take small steps. Do as much as you can. The biggest barrier is not changing. People who don't change, you're never going to change, and that's where we're never going to have any effects. So just little small steps.
Thanks, Vikki.
Yeah, to highlight Lydia's comment from earlier around overconsumption, I think that's one of the best places to start, is looking at where you're perhaps overusing and what you can do to change that and reduce that, because that will save you money as well. Easy win.
Yeah, and in addition, I would also highlight data gathering and target setting and collaboration. I think we can all learn from each other and then really optimize on the value chain level.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. We will be back on Wednesday with part 2, where we'll be going to look at the social values pillar of our sustainability roadmap to sustainability, and the corporate environmental impact from the perspective of emissions, waste and water. If you've got any questions that you'd like to submit in advance of that webinar, just drop me a quick email. That's pr@chsa.co.uk, and I can feed those questions into the system. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you
you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.